Twitter is this hotbed of idiocy by way of people with blue check marks next to their name. A few times throughout the day, I see especially stupid things coming from these types, and it's so noticeable because they have their loyal followings liking and sort of retweeting everything. It's one thing for somebody with absolutely no power to say this, but it's another for someone with pull to say this stupid stuff, because then other idiots sort of believe it and they run with it. Somebody has to call this nonsense out. So I figured I'd go ahead and start a series where I go through some of these tweets by these blue check marks. Okay, so today we're going through the tweets of some guy by the name of Xavier Bergen, in which he bashes capitalism. That's nothing new coming from a blue check mark leftist. He says capitalism cannot thrive without extreme have and have-nots. Capitalism at its core is a philosophy of wealth inequality and immoral monetary gain. It is a direct factor in why we had slavery and why slavery in slightly diluted forms like prison-industrial complex still exist. He then adds, slavery thrived because it made white supremacist slave masters money. Full stop. There is no debate or argument to this. Anyone who argues otherwise is a racist trying to justify slavery and or absolve capitalism of its what it will always lead to. He concludes, if you object to slavery, but you endorse non-heavily regulated capitalism and or unfettered free market, you are endorsing a cause of slavery. To not understand this means you are incredibly naive and or you have absolutely no grasp on capitalism's effect or slavery's causes. Okay, Mark, let's start by giving you the definition of capitalism. Capitalism is the private ownership of goods and services and the free and voluntary exchange of those private goods and services. So, for starters, you're operating based on a definition that is an absolute straw man of the position. Let's move on. You start by mentioning wealth inequality and immoral monetary gain. Now, wealth inequality is not inherently a bad thing, as individuals are individuals. They're not equal in preference nor productivity. So inequality is inevitable. The beautiful thing about capitalism is that it allows people to act on their sort of self-determination and have the most control over their economic mobility. The guy that works 35 hours sweeping the floor is not going to make as much money as a doctor that works 50 hours a week. Capitalism is not simply about monetary gain, it's about being able to do what you want with your own property, so as long as it doesn't aggress upon another individual. Money is just a medium of exchange. It's the most common commodity. And trying to get money is why people are incentivized to work and innovate. And the exchange for money for service or good is the most moral because there's no aggression and you help your fellow man or woman without even realizing it. In the exchange, the person values the good or service over the dollar and the other person values the dollar over the good or service. Some people spend money because they have to be able to maybe eat in order to survive, but that doesn't change the fact that it's the most moral in terms of a transaction, especially in comparison of forcing that person to engage in that exchange. So the notion that capitalism is why you had slavery is simply false, along with the prison-industrial complex. Slavery is antithetical to capitalism as it violates the person's property rights in terms of self-ownership. It's the forcible use of one person to serve the purposes of another. It's also historically false, as slavery was facilitated and instituted by the state, the regulators. That's the only way slavery can exist as it does, with the state ensuring its existence. This was the case in America with things like the slave codes and other laws and everywhere else throughout history. The prison-industrial complex isn't capitalism either. It's statism, literally. And slavery didn't exist because of free markets. It's stupid. It exists because the state facilitates its existence. And those same white supremacists you're griping about have used the state historically to keep slavery existing and keep it existing for as long as they did. This makes you the naive one as you act as if free markets are to blame for slavery simply because slave owners wanted money. You completely ignore the fact that the state literally regulated slavery. You also ignore the fact that some of the most tremendous innovations that have raised the living standards of all humankind were created by people wanting a buck. But it's incredible how you write off anybody arguing against your nonsensical claim as racist. That seems to be the go-to of many of these blue check marks. Racism is a word easily identified as bad, so when you want to claim someone as bad, just call them racist, even if it doesn't make sense. I can easily argue that the racist is the one arguing for government control and or regulation because it was the government that was used to facilitate slavery and implement the slave codes, them black codes, them Jim Crow laws in America. Your point didn't make sense as it was historically inaccurate. But blue check marks gonna blue check mark.